Assalamualaikum. Today I'm here to talk about T.S. Eliot essay tradition and individual talent. T.S. Eliot is very famous and daring figure in literary criticism and poetry of the modern period. This essay first published in 1990 in Times Literary Supplement, and it is considered an official manifesto of Eliot's critical creed. It forms the basis of all his subsequent criticism. This essay has three parts. The first part deals with the concept of tradition, second part deals with the theory of impersonality of poetry, third part sums up the whole discussion. Eliot's concepts of tradition. According to Eliot, tradition is not the slavish imitation of the past. Tradition cannot be inherited, it only be obtained by hard labor. Tradition can only be obtained by those who have the historical sense, involves the perception not only of the pastness of the past but also of its presence. One who has the historical sense feels that the whole of the literature of Europe Homer to his own day, including the literature of his own country, forms one continuous literary tradition. That is to say, the poet has to work hard, labor hard, and read the whole tradition, keep in mind the trends and different era before compose of his own poetry. Eliot's conception of tradition is a dynamic one. It is constantly changing, growing, and becoming different from what it is. The relationship between the past and present is reciprocal, just as the past directs and guides the present so that the present alters and modifies the past. When the when the poet is a new creation, literature it affects the existing one and it takes its place in the whole scheme of things and also affects the interpretation of the existing works of literature. A writer must seek guidance from past and conform to the literary tradition. The theory of impersonality of poetry. According to Eliot, the poet must be as impersonal as scientist. The emotions and passions of a poet must be depersonalized before it enter to the poetry. Eliot says the more perfect the artist, the more completely separate in him will be the man who suffers and the mind which creates. That is, poet deals with different emotion and feeling that can be has personal emotion and feeling or it can be experienced by him in some other ways but his two things very separate. The emotion and feeling might be personality. The mind then engages in creation of poetry that should not be affected by his personal emotion, that it should be completely separate. The personality of the poet is a Mars reciprocal. Eliot says it is just like a catalyst in a chemical reaction, that is a kind receptacle where emotions are collected text the form of poetry after refined. Eliot says honest criticism and sensitive appreciation is directed not upon the poet but upon the poetry. That is, a job critic in a criticize the personality of poet but the poem as such. Eliot's conception of poetry. According to Eliot, poetry is organized rather than inspiration. Eliot does not believe in the theory of inspiration that poets should be inspired to write. He rather believes more of organization. The greatness of a poem depends upon the intensity of process of poetic composition, which is a hard labor. The emotion of poetry is different from the personal emotion of the poet. Again, here his idea of personality of poetry comes. A life emotion of the poet does not enter into his poetry directly as it was. The emotion of poetry must be complex and refined. The emotion of poet might have should might have solved in his personal life or might have experienced in some other ways cannot enter into poetry as it is must be refined and have too complex. Even the emotions which the poet has never personally experienced can serve the purpose of poetry. Eliot concludes his essay by saying the poetry is not a turning loose of emotions but an escape from emotion. It is not expression of personality but an escape from personality. This essay, tradition and individual talent forms the basis of Eliot's critical creed and his classicism. He encourages and he gives a great responsibility upon the poet that a poet cannot be create or compose his poetry and isolation. He has to take into consideration the existing trend right from the classical age, and it is not something that will be read and interpreted isolation. Thank you.